right? So within real estate, I look at there's three types of ways that you can invest and still be diversified. Number one is the location, right? Location of where your investments are at. I say, well, don't always put everything in Florida, right? Don't put everything in like Texas. Put it in different areas. Learn and meet other operators who have it in that you can put in different areas. Well, number two is the operators, right? Don't always put it with the same operator in the same location. If you like an operator in different locations, great. That's a way of diversifying. And then I said, well, three is the asset class. Multifamily, you've got people in industrial, you've got storage spaces, you've got RV parks, you've got mobile homes. I mean, it's different ways.
Welcome to the Peak Profits Podcast, your guide to maximizing returns in passive real estate investing. Hosted by Brian Morris and Chris Ward of 7 Peak Capital, we dive into conversations with industry experts, sharing insights, strategies, and stories to elevate your investment portfolio. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, this podcast is designed to give you the edge for financial freedom. Get ready to unlock new opportunities, discover the secrets of successful investing, and take your passive real estate investments to the next level. Now, let's go reach those peak profits together.
Welcome back to Peak Profits. Today, we are excited to introduce Dr. Alex Tam. Alex is an entrepreneur and real estate investor, chiropractor, and clinical director with over 15 years of experience. In 2009, he and his wife launched their medical practice to help others find relief from pain. In 2018, he discovered real estate syndication, transitioning from passive investing to actively managing multifamily assets, now totaling over 200 units. Today, he helps healthcare professionals build wealth through real estate. Alex also co-founded a virtual assistant business to help busy professionals streamline their workload and achieve better work-life balance. Alex, we are excited to have you on the Peak Profits and looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, guys. Really excited.
Absolutely. So can you give us a little bit more of a background than I gave in the intro about who Alex Tam is and how you got into this business from being a doctor yourself to now focusing also on real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being a doctor, it's great. You get to help a lot of people and figure out a lot of challenges that people have with their health. And a lot of doctors are never taught how to invest, right? We're taught to become doctors. We weren't even taught how to run a clinic, really. And those were learned. And it was in 2018 that I wanted to learn more about how to run an actual business, right? And I stumbled upon this guy named Grant Cardone. It was a book of him sitting on top of a jet engine, Be Obsessed or Be Average, right? That was the book. I read through that whole book in a couple of days and I said, wow, this is really cool. I wonder if this guy's online in other places, right? You looked him up on YouTube and he just started popping up everywhere. I must have gotten pixeled and now I'm in Facebook. I see him, Instagram, YouTube, he's popping up. And all of a sudden, there was an ad that says, welcome to the second GrowthCon. I was like, what is a GrowthCon, right? So in 2018, I said, you know what? This looks really cool. I want to go learn more about business with other people who are business owners. And I flew out and attended my first GrowthCon. And it was in Las Vegas. And I said, okay, this is cool. Well, after the GrowthCon, at the end of each day, he'll talk about what he's doing on his personal life outside of business. And that was when he was really ramping up his syndications. I have never heard of LP syndications in anywhere ever before, right? That was a brand new term. It was like someone pulled it out of the dictionary and was like, hey, here's a new word. And at the time I said, okay, this is a pretty neat concept. You know, the year before we owned a single family home about 3 hours away in Reno, Nevada. And I knew the pain of driving back and forth and trying to get things fixed up. And I was like, man, I I can't be doing this for $100 of cash flow a month, maybe 150 at best after HOA fees. I said, this is ridiculous. And he was able to say, you know what? You invest with me. And he says, year one, you'll get 4%. I said, 4%? Wow, that's like triple what I'm getting right now in cash flow. So at the conference, I started talking to other people. I said, who's invested with this guy? Right? I've met some real estate brokers, commercial brokers that were all invested with him. I was like, wow, okay, well, so I made a call back home to my wife and I was like, hey, there's other people in real estate who are investing with this guy. I said, let's try it out. And she says, okay, if you think that's a good move. And till this day, I got to tell you, some people love him, some people don't, but his deals are one of the ones that are consistently cash flowing, And so I did that with him and other syndicators, right? Other partners as LPs from 2018 to 2021. And here's what happened. How I ended up joining Jake and Gino and getting more educated in this was because every time I would go to conferences, other doctors and friends would ask me, hey, what are you doing? I hear you're doing some real estate stuff. And then I said, oh, yeah, just go look online. I mean, they've got websites and all that. And eventually, so many people asked, I said, I should really learn more about this. If I'm going to talk about it openly, right? If I'm going to tell other doctors that, hey, this is the right move, I did it, and so should you, I should know a little bit more. And that's how I ended up joining Jake and Gino in November of 2021. And then since then, we joined MIH a few months after. And all the deals that we've been part of since then have been with Jake and Gino members and MIH members, whether it's GP, capital raising, we got into some JVs. I still invest in LPs, right? That way I don't have to do anything. And it's been quite a journey. Not only has it brought a lot of financial security to our family, because if I don't work today, we'll be fine. We'll be great. But it's also opened the doors for other doctors that we've brought on who were like, wow, I didn't know where to go or who to trust. And I said, well, don't just automatically trust what I do. I said, just look up these people that I work with and make sure you're comfortable. And I won't share a deal with you unless if I'm investing in it myself, right? And I'll tell you openly how much money I got put in there. So that way, hopefully it'll give you a little bit sense of ease. But I said, until you're ready, don't do it, right? I said, it's a bad deal it's worse than no deal. So make sure you're ready. So that's how kind of overall 30,000-foot view of how I got into it initially.
That's amazing. And I think one of the common things that we hear when we're speaking to people in the real estate industry, and obviously just like you did, is people often go and they trial going down the active route first. And it's typically through buying a single family home as a secondary investment property. And you hear about, you mentioned there $100 a month, maybe $150 a month. I know, Brian, you've mentioned this before on the podcast. You were cash flowing and then the hot water heater breaks and just wipes out 2 years worth of cash flow that you've ultimately built up, to then move into more of a passive approach. And you mentioned there, Alex, as well, that you still are actively looking into the passive approach where you are still a limited partner because therefore you don't have to do anything. Can you bring us back to any kind of due diligence you maybe did on the Grant Cardone investment that you did all the way back in 2018, or maybe it was at the beginning of 2019 by the time you had actually gone through and did the investment? What due diligence did you go through? You mentioned you had spoken to some people at the conference. Was there anything else that you did? And how did that initial wiring of the funds really make you feel, knowing that you're sending money to someone you maybe don't know personally, right? And that's not always that easy. Well, it's definitely not easy. I think back to when I wired my first funds, it was a scary moment. Like, can you talk us through the due diligence you did and how that really felt for you when you got into that first deal as an LP?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I'll be very honest. That first deal with Cardone, it was almost barely any due diligence. I just looked it up to make sure it was a real place.
Yeah.
I talked to about 20 people and I wired the funds the next day. It was like barely any due diligence.
You didn't know what you didn't know at the time, probably,
I had
and you just
zero
went off
clue.
his reputation.
I had zero clue. I had went off his reputation based on the books he's written, right? It was his second Growth Con. I wanted to attend the one in 2017. I couldn't, so I attended the one in 2018. I talked to people who seemed like they were successful in real estate, and I looked up the address and everything and looked around, make sure it wasn't in a class D neighborhood. It was actually like a B plus A neighborhood. And I was like, okay. And the first one went really well. I waited until they started funding. I was like, okay, they funded for about 6 months, and I did a second deal, and I started looking up. I found this website that I don't know if you guys heard of called Bigger Pockets, right? I didn't
Yep.
know. I didn't know. I was like, oh, this website, all people, all real estate talks about. I
Hmm.
said, so I started looking up other syndicators, and I started chatting with who are other syndicators, right? And other names popped up. I did some due diligence on them, had some phone calls with them, and then started investing with them. Now, I didn't know at the time, before I joined Jake and Gino and had the education, I didn't know what DSCR was. I didn't know cost per door. Yeah, you should be looking at comp rents, rent comps in the area. I didn't know to call other property managers to see if those rent comps actually make sense, right? I didn't know all of that. I do now, right? So how I look at deals early on when I didn't know anything to how I look at deals now are going to be a little different. I will figure out what the rent comps are, right? I will verify, like, hey, what are the other people who own properties in the area? What's their property taxes like, right? And what's the insurance situation like? How is the area? Talk to a few property managers. Hey, what do you know about this? Pretend like we're about to buy the property and they're going to be the property managers, whether they are or not. Also is the level of partners that you work with. That's the relationships in that. I can't hit that enough, right? It's the relationships that you've built with the people that you work with. Overall, can they be trustworthy? Have they done this before, right? If someone's used to operating a 12 unit deal and all of a sudden they scale to 50, you might have to question that a little bit. Or who else are they partnering with that has done 50 to 100, right? If everybody's on 15 and then bam, everyone went to 50, it's like you're gonna deal with some different problems, right?
Absolutely.
So that's how I do my due diligence nowadays, a little different.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and it's obviously your journey from where you started in 2018 and you kind of brought us through today in 2025, what that's looked like. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this podcast are successful professionals in their W-2, much like you are yourself. And they might be where you were in 2018, which is either thinking about getting into real estate or having that first house. And now they're thinking about whether, do I scale the single family route? How scalable is it? Do single family even make sense nowadays with 7+% interest rates? Does it even cash
Right.
flow? Right? Like it's hard to even pencil out any cash flow now. Right. So people are like, how do I even get started in real estate? Is it even possible to buy a rental property that makes sense? Or am I just banking on appreciation long term and okay with breaking even? Right. So there's different, I guess, shifts in the market that have happened since you have started. And my question kind of goes back to, how is your perspective from in 2018 when you went to that first Next Growth conference to where you are today on the real estate market? And what's your focus in? I know you've shifted from being a limited partner to more of an active side. What's your focus today as we stand here in 25?
My focus today is I've realized, well, I'm not going to be a full-time capital raiser, right? That was kind of my route that I thought about. I said, well, yeah, it sounds really good. I could capital raise and, the clinic can just run on its own. And I thought about maybe not expanding on the practice, but my thoughts have shifted. I can still do some part-time capital raising, for operators that I know are going to perform really well and has in history, and at the same time continue to grow our practice and take the funds and the profits that we have from the practice and keep pumping it in the real estate. That's really the cycle of money for me, is earn the money, pop it in the real estate, let the passive income roll in, and have the passive income fund our lifestyle.
I think that's important. I want to add too, is because we're all still in our W 2. And I think far too often people think I need to fully make a jump into a real estate investor. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. If you have a successful W 2 job where you're making a good earning, maybe a couple $100,000 a year plus, you have some investable capital to invest and diversify outside the market or that 401k. I think we talk about it often on the podcast, but you just kind of reiterated it. You don't necessarily need to leave your W 2 or your profession, but you can still invest and actively own or passively own real estate through these investments, right? And I think it's a great avenue that Chris and I both found. And our stories are a little bit different. Chris went directly into passive, and I went that active route first, single family, a little small multifamily, and then found passive investments. But we both work today, high income W 2 jobs, and we choose to take a lot of that income and put it into real estate to grow that wealth. So I just wanted to add that because I think it's a point that you mentioned, and a lot of people far too often think that they need to just go into real estate full time if they're going to get into the business.
And I'll tell you, you're 100% right, because during the time that I got into real estate was hot, right? 2018, 19, 21, even into part of 2022, it was so hot that people quit and dropped their high income paying W-2s and went fully into real estate. And here's what happened. Multiple people, some of them you probably know as well, have gone that route. And because they went that route and now they rely solely on getting deals done, they got into some hot waters because they ended up getting in whatever deal they can get their hands on, because the way they make money is on the acquisition fees up front. And a lot of people got burned by some of these people because that's what they needed to survive, right? And I tell people, I said, you don't have to give up your W-2s. I said, why would you do that? Right? Oh, I want to do it full time. I said, I understand you want to do it full time. Work up to it. Work up to it until that real estate position can fully, you understand. I said, give it 6 months. If it can fund your lifestyle for 6 months, okay, maybe it's solid. Then you got to test the waters a little bit. What if the market tanks a bit? Can it still fund, right? 2023 and 2024 was a little slower. Not as many transactions went through. So you're 100% right, Brian.
Yeah, and you touched on a really, really important point there as well, Alex, which is kind of the market cycles that take place. And 23 and 24 were a lot slower. I think 25 probably will not be as good as it was in 2021. Definitely don't think it will be as good as it was in 2021. But what I do want to bring this almost back to, Alex, is you're very passionate about guiding doctors and healthcare professionals into multifamily real estate. Why is that such a good fit for professionals in the medical field or professionals that have kind of really high demanding jobs that takes a lot of their time and efforts away from either doing the due diligence, finding the right partners? I mean, you mentioned 5 or 6 different things that you do when you're now doing due diligence, of calling property management companies and having them compare to what the rent, the proposed rents would be. Like, not everybody has either knowledge to do that, as you mentioned, like you were back in 2018, also the time. So can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I'm so passionate about it among professionals who don't have time, and you mentioned time. Time is the one thing we have a finite amount of, right? And so many professionals, they're focused on making money, and then they spend time on figuring out how to burn that money right away. right? You can see it. It happens in our society all the time. You make $100,000, you now have $100,000 lifestyle. You make 400,000, now your lifestyle is at 400,000. And what happens is if someone gets hurt, I've seen it, right? I've seen doctors go skiing one weekend, the next weekend tear up their whole ACL joint, and now they're in a cast for 6 months. They can't practice. Their practice just tanks. What happened? They start losing boats. They start losing jet skis. Their car leases are like going back to the dealership. And I'm like, dude, you guys are all messed up. I met a doctor once. He makes 750,000, except he barely has 150,000 in the bank. And I was like, how does that? What the hell's happening here?
Yeah.
You know. So I'm very passionate about it because I know the reality is so many people are living, whether high income or not, paycheck to paycheck. About 70% of the population live paycheck to paycheck, right? And the stress of that is enormous. What if there was a way for professionals to say, you know what? Maybe there is a different way. No one showed them that way. See, they've been showed MTV Cribs and Live the Life, and that's what they've been shown to do. We were shown all that in our generation, but no one's really came out and says, hey, pop this money into something, let it grow, and let that buy you the things that you desire so that you don't ever touch the capital, right? When I learned that concept, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what it means to be financially independent. And I went to share that with my doctor friends, and they're like, well, that was never even a concept. Like, I never even thought that was a thing. Like, is that possible? And I said, well, we just got to run the numbers, right? What's your lifestyle that you want? Let's say average 6%, and then figure out how much you want to invest, right? We're just talking about purely cash flow. It's not even talking about the refis and the sales and all that. Let's just pure cash flow. And then we sit down, within 5 minutes, you figure out how much money they got to invest. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so behind, right? So it's a realization of that. And that's why, when I see that light bulb click in their mind and they're like, holy crap, that's possible. I don't have to work until I'm 65. If I do this consistently, I could retire in my 50s. And I'd be like, yeah, maybe even late 40s.
Yeah. No,
Right.
I think you bring up a good point there too. And one of the things that comes to my head initially is obviously the younger you start investing and diversifying, the better, because as we know, compound interest, compound growth, if you could take a investable portion of your income, whatever that income may be, then you could start to grow that wealth, right, throughout your career, right? And while you're working a W-2. And if you're scaling in a W-2 or creating more income year over year in your W-2 job, you can continue to invest into other assets and then invest and grow that wealth. And I think that's important because, again, it sounds like you got into it years ago, and obviously you're scaling. And Chris and I, even though I felt, I bought my first rental property at 24, I am so glad I did. Right, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad right after college, and it kind of shifted my whole mindset around. I need to think about assets versus liabilities and where I want to place my money. And at the time I was only making 50,000. So I didn't have that much money to place, right? I didn't have that much extra cash, but I think it's important when you're talking about that to understand what is your budget today and what can you afford? And then how are you thinking about investing that money? And so what is your thought around staying in the market and investing in real estate as well? Because personally, I have a 401k still with my job at Salesforce. I still have some diversification, but I think it's definitely important to diversify into real estate and other asset classes. So are you focused fully on real estate, or do you have diversification into other pieces of the market, or is it just multifamily? Do you do other forms of real estate? What is your focus there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when other doctors who are working for companies, they ask me, should I pull money out of my 401k and put it into real estate? I said, well, you don't have to actually pull money. I said, you can use like a self-directed 401k, self-directed IRA, and you can actually pull money there. And they say, well, should I still put money into 401k? And I said, it's really a question that you have to ask yourself. But if your employer, like for me, I'm an employer and we have 401ks for our doctors and staff, and we match, right? And I said, if they could match it, I mean, you're doubling your money right away that you're investing. I said, why? I don't see why that's a problem, and then you could pull that money out and invest it into real estate. Now, within real estate, I said, if you've ever read, the principles from Ray Dalio, he talks about diversification. It's a great book for business, for investing. And he talks about real estate or investments that are independent from each other, right? So within real estate, I look at there's 3 types of ways that you can invest and still be diversified. Number 1 is the location, right? Location of where your investments are at. I say, well, don't always put everything in Florida, right? Don't put everything in like Texas. Put it in different areas. Learn and meet other operators who have it in that you can put in different areas. Well, number 2 is the operators, right? Don't always put it with the same operator in the same location. If you like an operator in different locations, great. That's a way of diversifying. And then I said, well, 3 is the asset class. Multifamily, you've got people in industrial, you've got storage spaces, you've got RV parks, you've got mobile homes. I mean, it's different. Now, some people are like, I'm all into multifamily. Great. Pick a couple different locations or different operators, right? You're still diversifying, but there's multiple ways to diversify. Either pick one of those to diversify or all 3. But that is one way to diversify what you do within real estate. For me, most of my stuff is in real estate. I don't have barely anything in 401ks, IRAs, because no one's matching me. So that's where I stand for me, right? But that's not always the case that I recommend for everyone.
Yeah, and I think you're essentially talking about there is an opportunity to get quote unquote free money, right, with the match. So you might as well leverage that as much as you can. But then there are different mechanisms of leveraging that money to further invest it through the self-directed IRAs that you mentioned. And I think it's a really good point as well. The 3 points you made there, right? Location, the operators, and then ultimately the asset classes as well. How have you gone through identifying, and well, even yourself, you are part of that operator group in a certain capacity. You mentioned at the start as well that you also do some JVs at this point. If you're somebody, or if you were speaking to somebody that has a substantial amount of capital sat in the bank and they are looking to invest that, maybe not as an LP position, but they want to be in more of an active role within real estate, what would you share with them as to how they should go and find partners? Because you also mentioned this right at the beginning, that the relationships you build, real estate is very much a team sport. There's not somebody, unless they have millions and millions and millions of dollars in the bank, they have all of the knowledge in the world that can go ahead and do and manage and take down all of this themselves. Like, what advice would you give to those people?
Well, the first thing I would tell those people who let's say someone has 500,000 stored up, not doing anything, they want to invest. The first thing I'll tell them is, don't tell anyone you have 500,000. Yeah. Okay? Don't tell anyone you got 500,000 and they're waiting to invest, because everyone's going to be your best friend, right? Find a reputable mastermind or a educational group and be part of that group. And once again, don't tell people how much money you have to invest. And because if they want to do it actively, you got to get educated. You can't blindly, right? As an LP, you have some room of error where you can put some money with this operator that you felt like you can trust, right? But if you want to do active, you got to know what you're doing. Right? You got to know what the due diligence process is. What is that? What does the walkthrough look like? How does the financing look? And how do you do a T12 rent roll audit? All these things you have to know if you're going to be active, right? It's just like, hey, you know what? Today I want to be a surgeon. I want to learn how to become a surgeon. What's the best way to do it? Go to school for it, right? We're not talking about investing in a hospital. We're talking about you actively becoming a surgeon, right? And you have to take it that seriously when it's with real estate, right? So many people think, oh yeah, you just buy it and it just goes up and it just, right? I've had deals that didn't work out the way we thought it was going to be. Plumbing lines burst and it becomes an $80,000 fix because the city's like, it's not our problem. Like, holy crap, you know? So you really need to figure out not just the people aspect, but also the educational aspect behind it, right? That's why we were part of the same group in Jake and Gino's. We got educated in there. And I feel that most people are so excited that they just want to jump in, and they ended up having a sour taste in their mouth because they didn't jump in correctly or with the right equipment. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think it's important, to your point, if you do want to be on the active side, that you do invest in yourself and your education, because there's so many people online and in Bigger Pockets or the different forums that say like, hey, I just bought real estate, and they paint this picture that it is easy. And as we all know here, that it's far from it, right? The work really starts when you close on that property and starting to have to
Absolutely.
manage it, right? And manage tenants and the different CapEx and things that come up throughout the whole period, right? You're now running a business, you're running an operation that you're trying to optimize and run as efficiently as possible. And so I think that's such an important point that you make is do your education, invest a little bit of time and knowledge on whether it's books, podcasts, and mastermind groups. I think it's super important because it could save you, those costly expenses in the long run. But with that said, being on the active side, it does take a lot of time if you want to do that, and to juggle a W-2 job with the active part of real estate, due diligence, like running financials, understanding on the financing aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you separate? You're still a doctor today, and you're still doing a lot of real estate, right? Both actively, passive investments. You're doing a lot of that. How do you separate that? And I know we touched on briefly in the intro, you have a virtual assistant business. Do your VAs help you with some of that scaling? So I'd be interested in how you really balance your time throughout the week and how you
Yeah.
get so much done between both jobs.
So the virtual assistants, I've been working with virtual assistants before virtual assistant was hot. I stumbled upon it in 2016, and we hired, by 2018, we had 4 virtual assistants. Today, we have 12 full-time virtual assistants that work for me, and that's with the practice. They work on the virtual assistant business, right? They create content for the real estate side. They handle my emails, calendar, everything, social media. They handle that. So being able to leverage people and be able to work with people is key, right? Between the 12 virtual assistants and the 6 full-time staff in the office, and all the other virtual assistants that work for other business owners and other real estate professionals as well, you got to be able to manage the time. But before you even think about managing the time, I like to ask people about what their ideal day looks like. Like, what does your ideal week look like? Everyone is in different stages, right? Do any of you guys have children? Kids?
Yeah.
Not yet,
Not yet. Okay,
but
not yet.
thinking about it this year.
Thinking about it this
It's
year,
going to
right? You
probably
just got
turn my
married.
life upside down, right?
You just got married, right? So now you got to think about, okay, I asked people that question. I said, do you have a child or not? And that really determines things. Of course, do you have a spouse or not? Okay, ideally, let's look at why we do this, right? We need to think about how we have business and we work so that we could have a lifestyle that we want. We're not doing this to work just for work, right? Don't make work your life. Think of work as something that funds your life overall. So they're like, okay, that's a different concept, you know? And I said, okay, so ideally, what does your life look like, right? And then people start thinking about what their life looks like. And then I said, okay, if that's what your life looks like in terms of time, in terms of money, places you want to experience and travel, now this is the amount of time that you have to spend. This is the amount of money that it takes. What are you willing to sacrifice right now and for how long to get to that point, right? And there's a lot to be said on how you plan that out. Right now, I'm actively in the clinic 2 days a week, right? The other days, I'm spending time with my daughter, my wife. I'm here on Monday at 7:41 a.m. doing a podcast with you guys. The ability to do that has been all the hard work that I've done through working in the business and being able to hold off on the immediate gratification and buying something to putting that into real estate and then have real estate fund our life as well. You know, as we speak today, real estate fully funds our expenses, fully funds it, so that everything that we do outside of real estate, like in the office, let me take that back. Between the VA business and the real estate, it funds it. So everything that I do in the practice, right, it's just extra that I get to put back into real estate. So now how I manage my life now is a little different than how I managed it 5 years ago, you see. So I like to have people think about that first. Where do you see yourself? You know, and then kind of work backwards from there.
I think that's really, as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking through it myself. Like the light bulb kind of goes off in your own head, even when you're having these conversations of where do I ultimately want to get, what things, and you put it so articulately of what are you willing to sacrifice now, right? And I think that's a really, really key thing, that this stuff doesn't just come from everybody being so fortunate that they have money saved, right? There are sacrifices that you do ultimately have to make in order to get to where you want to be. And a lot of that typically comes with time, right? And that's where you spoke about kind of the virtual assistants really enable you to free up some of that time. But what advice would you give to someone that is kind of feels a little bit overwhelmed or is struggling to really scale either their own business or scale within a W2 that they're in, and ultimately create more time freedom for themselves to allow them to, whether it's invest, create some form of side hustle, right? What advice would you give to someone, Alex, from that perspective?
So to understand your question, is someone who wants to do it but don't have the time?
Correct. And again, if I think back to sacrifices, I think time is one of the first things that everyone talks about, right? Like, and Brian would attest to this. He said this to me many, many times while I'm trying to train for a triathlon. He's like, how many hours of Netflix have you watched this week? Like you could have trained, right? So there's sacrifices
Yes.
of time immediately there. But like a lot of people get overwhelmed with trying to identify some of that and really struggling to scale from that perspective. So just wondering if you had a few words of wisdom really for people to really start to think about where their time could be the better utilized.
Yes.
Or
I believe that people get overwhelmed because they don't have clarity of where they're going. See, you talk about people who get overwhelmed because they're doing so many different things. And then you sit them down and you say, what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to do? I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do. No, I get it. I get you're actively doing so many things. But what does this life looks like 5 years later? Well, here's what my life will look like 5 years later. Okay, so that's what it looks like 5 years later. But what's the end goal here? Recently, I sat down with a bunch of guys and we did a Tahoe retreat for about 3 days. And one of the things that we did, one of the activities that we did was we wrote our eulogies. Now, some people thought, oh, that's a little dark. You wrote your eulogy. I said, yeah. Why'd you do that? Well, in a eulogy, you really think about what would other people say about the impact that you've had on their life. What would your future kids say? What would your siblings say? What would your parents say? You see, what would they say about you, about the impact that you've had in their life? What would your friends say? From there, what we did, we spent a whole day writing our eulogies. And from there, we sat down and we said, okay, if that's what your eulogy is, why don't you write down what a 5-year outlook looks like and you reverse engineer that eulogy? See, for me, I made the realization, I said, you know what? My contribution piece is where I'm lacking. I really wanted to invest in kids who are underprivileged or in areas that are underprivileged, or moms who are struggling to just even buy the basic needs for their kids, right? And I realized, I said, you know what? Why just invest in families? Why not open schools for kids who are underprivileged? So now my thought process has changed, right? It's no longer about just me, but what do I want to experience with my wife and daughter? They want to travel the world. And a book that I've read called Die with Zero says, why wait? It's a great book, by the way. Die with Zero, if you guys never read it, because
It's on
as
my
we get,
list.
it's on your list, right?
Yeah, I've
Because
heard it. Yeah.
as we get older, most people think, oh, I'll experience it when I'm retired. When you retire, your ability to experience things dramatically decreases. Your physical ability, your mental ability decreases. So what kind of experiences do you want to have? And then you work your life backwards from it. And investing usually is one of them.
Yeah.
In order to achieve that, you can't just spend money and make it and spend it and make it and spend it, right? So I would suggest that people do that. And if you have clarity, you will have less overwhelm because you know where you're going. See?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and you got me thinking about like reflecting, right, as you talk through that. And I think we all talk about, all of us who are motivated and driven, that we have these goals of where we want to get to, or what we want our life to be like, or how we want to spend our days and our weeks. And I think it's important to reflect on how we get there, and to your point, work backwards. So you provided a ton of amazing knowledge and content today. What's next for Alex and your businesses in 2025, and as we look into the future of real estate and kind of where we're going? What's next for you? And where's your focus for this year and into those next 5 years for yourself?
In real estate, my focus this year is stability. I'm not looking to get into many deals, but the great deals that come up, we're going to lean heavily on. Like you mentioned, 2023 and 2024 has been slow, right? But I've invested more in 2023 and 2024 than I've ever did before because we played a bigger part in less deals, right? And in 2025, the big focus is going from a doctor in the office to a leader in the office that trains other doctors. And that's what really I have done. I haven't done a consult in our office for a few months now because I'm training our doctors and our staff members how to do a great job and leading them, right? And that's where my focus is. And once we get this first practice where it can operate on its own without me having to be there, then I will feel very comfortable opening a second practice. But at the same time, is that necessary right now at this point? My daughter's 12. You know, today we get to take her to tennis camp, and then my wife go hang out in Napa for the day. And I enjoy where I am right now. Here's what I share with some doctors. I tell them, you see on social media planes, jets, boats, and all of that, right? You see their life and you want that life. And it's okay if you truly want that life. But at the same time, anything new that I do now, I ask myself, 3 questions. Okay. Let's say someone says, hey, I want to start a new venture. I said, wonderful. That's great. I asked myself these 3 things. Number 1, should I do this? Right? Just because I could doesn't mean I should. Right? Number 2 is, what am I giving up? I asked myself that. If I'm going to go into something new, I'm going to give up something. What am I giving up? And then number 3 is, does this provide me more energy, right? The energy that I'm looking for, or is it robbing me of energy? See? So these are questions that I constantly ask when new things come up, because as you do more, people ask you questions and people want to do business with you. And you have to think about, if you're having a child, what are you willing to sacrifice? All right, you got to know, Brian,
Yep.
waking up 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning it can be a little consistent at the beginning.
Yep. Oh, it's going to be exhausting. I see it with our friends already. I hear it. Yeah, it's a great point to reflect on. But yeah, we're at that point where we're thinking about it. But the way you think about taking those next steps and ventures and reflect on that is important.
Yeah, and then you have to, once you're married, Chris, are you married as well?
I'm not married.
Not married. Hey, you got that
Not yet.
freedom to roam right now, man. You get to spread your wings and fly. Because when you are married, you have to think about the responsibility of your other half as well, right? How do they see it? Now you're in it together, right? You're rowing together, hopefully in the same direction. Are they in support? Like my wife, she's in support of the things that I do. But I can also tell that as long as it also aligns with what she wants to do as well. If all I want to do is work, 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 and we don't get to travel, oh man, it's over,
You're a dead
right?
man walking.
And then walking. So I said, what do? Every 6 months, I evaluate what the next 12 months look like. Like we've got trips and experiences, and trips are important to us. And we've got everything planned out and booked till the end of November right now. And we're planning March of 2026. See, everything is set. It's locked in, it's paid for, it's booked. That way we always have something to look forward to. I can work my ass off, and she's like, hey, we got these trips coming up. It fulfills her, right?
Absolutely. You should, you've probably been there, Alex. Well, one of the places I enjoyed in Napa, talking about trips, I went to Napa 3 years ago. Jarvis, we actually had a bottle of
Okay.
wine
Yeah.
from Jarvis over Valentine's Day. That was a great place in Napa. So you should definitely, it sounds like you've obviously already been there
Yeah.
yourself as well.
Jarvis is nice. The caves, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. But where can people find you, Alex? Obviously, you've been kind enough to share a ton of wisdom, as Brian mentioned, with us. But where can the listeners find you? Where can they find you from a real estate perspective, a virtual assistance perspective, but also from a
They can
practice perspective as well?
find me Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. They can find me on Lake Tahoe paddling on the weekday sometimes, or hitting the slopes snowboarding, you know. And
That's
those are the things that we do, that we get to enjoy and love to do. And if you guys ever come out to the Lake Tahoe area, come hang out, you know.
I
Yeah, I'm
would.
usually there a few days a week.
All right, I'll book my flight now. I know Chris and I went. Chris and I went there a couple years ago with a group of friends,
Oh, okay.
and we spent a couple days on the lake.
Yeah,
And it was in the summer, and it was just an amazing experience. It's beautiful there.
absolutely.
So I know we'd probably love to get back at some point.
Yeah, I'm there
Lake
at
did
least.
swallow one of my hats. I will say that. So
There you
it's
go. I
proud
mean,
owner of one of my caps.
There you
yeah,
go.
but that's where I'm at usually when I'm not in the office. Is we're up there
Sounds
4 to 5 days a week.
This sounds like you're already creating an amazing life for yourself between the travels and where you live and the experiences that you're living. And I'm sure a lot of that is due to all the hard work you put into becoming a doctor and investing. So I think that all kind of ties in. And we'll definitely put your information in the show notes so people can reach out to you and get in contact. But super, super thankful for you coming on. I think you shared a ton of amazing wisdom, experience, and what you've learned. And we're excited for this show to be out there and for the listeners to listen.
Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Talk soon.
Talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Peak Profits Podcast. We hope today's episode was not only inspiring, but packed with actionable insights for your passive real estate investments. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review. Your feedback fuels our passion to bring you even more valuable content. Stay connected with us on social media and visit 7peakcapital.com for exclusive resources and updates. Until next time, keep striving towards your financial goals and let's reach new peaks together.